We can't start till, I don't even know if that's on. We can't start till 5:30 because, you know, that's how it is. If you are new to a board and you have not been sworn in, if you would please see Victoria, she would be happy to swear you in, and then that part is taken care of. All right, it is 5:30. It is, I am calling the meeting to order for our Board and Commission annual training. There's a couple of reasons why we do that, and I'll go over some of that stuff in a second, but the first thing we have to do is determine if there are any boards that have a quorum, and I think if Carrie Fossler's in the room, the Parks Board has a quorum, right? Because I've got, and Betty's like, yes, Parks Board rules. So when Carrie comes back in, Barbara's not here, so Betty, I'll get you to call the Parks Board to order because you guys, I think you guys have a quorum with your four, but I don't see any other, does anybody else think their board is at a quorum? I don't think there's physically enough people except for on that one board, so I'll get Carrie to call that to order. If you, I'm not going to do this at the meeting, but please, if you don't know everybody in the room, make a point of introducing yourself. Mayor Pro Tem Nelson? If you include you too? Okay, and you're the chair of that board? Okay, so you want to call Hunters Crossing to order?
Sure, I'll call to order a meeting of the Hunters Crossing Local Government Corporation.
Awesome. Betty, you want to call Parks to? Excellent, excellent. All right, taking care of that. We've already taken care of the first item. First off, thank you so much for joining us tonight. We've done this every year. The main focus is folks that haven't been on the board before, but I promise you, Alan is such an outstanding speaker. You will get something from it. I've heard it every year, and you always, it's a great reminder, and he does such a good job presenting. I'm really glad that we can be in person. Last year we did it virtual, and I don't know about you guys, but I am just zoomed out. It is really hard for me to concentrate when I'm on the Zooms. But in Bastrop, we ask a great deal of our boards and commissions. We really rely on you guys. You are an extension of City Council. It's hard to get interaction from 10,000 people. We tend to hear from a small percentage of folks, and they tend to write when they're really mad about something that has happened within 30 feet of them. But just getting general feedback and trying to make sure that we're doing the right strategy thing, that's one of the things that we really count on with our boards. It's how you help us make democracy work at the local level, and we really appreciate that. Although we expect a lot out of you, we try to help you as much as we can. Each of the boards has a council liaison, so it's really my hope that whenever your board meets, there's one council member that's there. They are not on the board, but they can kind of help navigate. Sometimes I answer things like, when's the next council meeting? You know, we can just sort of help out with things. You will also have a staff liaison. There'll be somebody that publishes the agenda. They work with our city secretary to make sure some of the technicalities that Alan's going to visit with you about, they'll make sure that that kind of stuff happens. So the main thing that you need to bring is take a quick look at your packet if that's appropriate for your board, and a good attitude and a willingness to work with other folks, and we will all be just fine. You guys are often the front lines, particularly those of you on planning and zoning. Sometimes you get to visit with all of our citizens up close and personal, and sometimes from the board meeting and then things from your board meetings, things then go to council, and we don't always agree. But council doesn't have to agree. Sometimes we have additional information. Sometimes we just have a different perspective. But we don't override you without thinking about it long and hard and without really good reasons, but your input is extremely valuable, and we hardly ever go against your advice, and we really value the work that you go through to come up with your recommendations for council. Let me introduce some folks, and I probably should have done this first. Our city secretary is Ann Franklin. I think everybody knows Ann. Our Deputy City Secretary is Victoria Pinnick, and that's who was swearing you guys in. Our City Manager is Paul Hoffman. I'll introduce him in just a second. And our City Attorney is Alan Borquez, and Alan will be doing the majority of the presentation tonight. He's going to give you an overview of really important laws, and he has done this for long enough that he's got some great practical tips for you. It's our hope that this information will empower you and help you do a great job to fulfill your duties. And quite selfishly, we're also hoping to help you avoid creating problems, because those problems kind of come back to us. So we can help you with knowing emails to send and not send, and how to handle some things. He's going to help you with that. Please pay attention, take notes if it makes sense. If you didn't get a handout, we'll get a handout to you. And with that, it is my privilege to introduce our City Manager, Paul Hoffman. Thank you guys for coming out tonight.
So my job is to introduce Alan Borquez, the city attorney, and I think he's concerned that I'm going to read through his bio. No worries, that's not at all what I plan to do. What I thought I would do is channel the guy who comes out before the play starts, right? Like at Bastrop Opera House, there's always someone who comes out before the curtain goes up and says things like, "You're in for a treat." Silence your cell phones. No flash photography, please. Anybody here from out of town? I guess maybe that one doesn't apply so much. I think you are in for a treat, and as they say before the play, if you hear something funny, go ahead and laugh. That doesn't hurt anything. You are going to hear a lot of really good information. We are privileged to be served by Alan and his team. He is a very accomplished and well-known municipal attorney in Texas, and we are blessed and privileged that he pays a lot of attention to Bastrop personally, and we do appreciate that, and we do keep him pretty busy. I will reiterate a couple of things that the mayor said. At each of your meetings, there will be somebody who's employed by the city. Most of your boards have a city-appointed liaison. There's a council liaison. There's also a city staff liaison. If there's ever anything you need from the board's perspective to make things go more smoothly, please, that's the person you talk to first. And if that doesn't work, you yell at Ann or me, and we'll make sure we take care of it. So, as they say before the play starts, sit back, relax, and it's not so much a performance, but do enjoy what you're about to hear. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul. Is the volume okay, Colin? Is this one off? How about that? I was afraid when Paul said he's going to come out like the person before the play, I'm familiar with the person before the Greek play that comes out and apologizes for what you're about to see and any mistakes that they make. I'm glad Mayor Connie thinks that I'm a capable presenter. Paul thinks I'm capable. But in the end, I've played to an audience of one, and it worked. 10 years ago today, I gave a version of this talk to volunteers at the village of Salado. And unbeknownst to me, because y'all are all just blank faces, somewhere in the audience was a person who goes, "Huh, he's interesting. I wonder what his story is." We've been married for 3 years and dating for 10 years ago today. But don't worry, I took her to lunch. So Sheila got lunch today because I knew I would be here with y'all tonight. Last week, I had the honor of going to a city that we're not city attorney for, on the other side of the world from where we are in Bastrop, because the mayor and the mayor pro tem filed ethics complaints against a fellow who was chair of their charter review and their zoning board of adjustment. So the city attorney bowed out of that case, rightfully, and they brought me in as special counsel just to kind of guide them through the process of hearing these complaints and deciding if there's anything to do about it. It's not my favorite type of work, but it's the kind of work that I've been called on to do before. Instead, I would much rather be doing what I'm doing tonight, which is teaching you for a little while, a couple hours we have here tonight, in order to help you avoid mistakes at the front end. Understand what you're getting into, and if you have questions along the way, today, next month, next year, raise your hand and ask, and you've got staff, a council liaison, guys like me who will come and help you try to avoid problems. Because as the mayor said, y'all are very important to how the city of Bastrop actually governs. Even though you're volunteer, even though you're appointed, it's a big part of our system. It could also be a source of liability. And so we do training up front to try to avoid all that nastiness down the road. So I will try to make this interesting. It's hard to work all day and come sit through this. But as far as law stuff goes, I think it's pretty interesting and hopefully you'll like it. Feel free to ask questions along the way. I've got a lot to cover in a short amount of time, but we certainly have time to stop and ask questions, because if you have one, you're probably not the only one. We're starting off with ethics. Not every city has a code of ethics. It's not required under the law. Several years ago, I represented the city of Denton, Texas, up in North Texas, who the only reason they have an ethics code today is because their citizens forced them to do so in their home rule charter. They actually had an election to compel the city to adopt a code of ethics, and ultimately we did that. We had one when I came on board in Bastrop in 2017. The council took a look at it and chose to make some changes. So this is the new improved version that you'll get a little bit of a highlight of today. It covers city officials. And if you look at our code of ethics, which is available online, it's part of our code of ordinances along with all of our other rules. For sure, a city official is a city council member. It is certain department directors, the city attorney, the city manager, and the municipal court judge. Those are the three that are all appointed by the city council. Employees are not covered by this beyond those that are listed because they're covered by the personnel policies and directly accountable to the city manager himself. We have a home rule charter here in Bastrop, which I like to tell folks is basically our constitution. The voters of Bastrop chose a charter that gives the city certain powers and withholds certain powers for the citizens, and then it kind of spells out our type of government. And our type of government here is called a city manager form, or the manager council form of government, meaning the city manager is responsible for day-to-day operations and overseeing most employees. The people he does not directly supervise, the city judge and the city attorney. The definition of city officials also covers planning and zoning, zoning board of adjustment, and BEDC. And so if you're a member of those three boards, the council chose to cover you under the same ordinance they are covered with. If you're not on one of those three boards, then you can go ahead and check Facebook for the next 30 minutes. No, you're not going to do that, because I'm going to mention some state laws that also are covered under ethics and may apply to you depending on what you do. So hang in there. The ordinance covers vendors. So those corporations that provide goods, services, property to the city, they have certain aspects of this code of ethics that apply to them, namely offering gifts. If they offer gifts to city officials, there can be some prohibitions and some punishment for doing that, particularly if the gift is of a type that is likely to influence a purchasing decision that we make here at City Hall. The ordinance covers former city officials, so pay attention to that. If you're under the definition of a city official, this can apply to you for 1 year after you leave service. Not the whole broad ordinance, but specifically the parts regarding the representation of others for money. So if your plan was to get to know City Hall, get to know the rules, get to know the people, and then hit the door running so you could quickly become a lobbyist, there's going to be a limitation on that for a period of 1 year. It's only going to apply to projects that you actually worked on when you were here, and it's only going to apply if you're representing other parties for money. So if you're volunteering, you're representing the VFW, well, it's not going to cover it. Or if it's a project you had nothing to do with. So it's fairly narrow in scope, but we like folks to keep remembering this. Some cities' ordinances go much beyond this, and the prohibition is much longer than we have here in Bastrop. When it comes to just general expectations, whether you are specifically covered by this code code or not, we're hoping that you will ascribe to these. Will you conduct yourself in a manner that inspires trust? If we behave in a way that shows that we are people of integrity, we're hoping that this is viewed as an organization of integrity. And the citizens can trust that while they may disagree with the decision we made it for the right reasons. We had a good process for doing so. We weren't just making these decisions to fatten our wallets or our kids' college funds. That's important. For us to govern, we need the people that are being governed by City Hall to trust us and why we're doing what we're doing. We're hoping with every vote, with every conversation, with every email and text message, you are trying to uphold the integrity of the organization. Paul mentioned in the intro that this is a city I pay attention to. Any given month, my firm represents about 45 cities statewide. I am city attorney of Bastrop. It's the only city that I'm city attorney of and the only one that I attend their meetings. This means a lot to me. And one reason that is the case is because the sense of integrity I sense every time I deal with Anne Franklin or every conversation I have with the Mayor Pro Tem Lyle in the back. That matters to this group of people, and so it's my job to help keep that up and conduct myself in a way that doesn't reflect poorly on the people that gave me my job. We're hoping that by agreeing to serve, you made that critical choice the moment you said, "You bet I will," to put the city's interests above your own. And if you can't do that, then I hope when tonight's over, you quietly send the mayor an email and say, "Will you please replace me?" Because all of us are supposed to put the citizens of Bastrop, the property owners, the voters, the business owners, above our own self-interest. If you do that, you're not going to have any problem with our code of ethics. And finally, we try really hard to balance this need, this commitment to be transparent with our obligation to safeguard the city's confidential, privileged information. We deal with a lot of sensitive data, financial data, healthcare data, employee data about their investments or their retirement, litigation. Sometimes we are the plaintiffs and we are bringing lawsuits. Sometimes Bastrop is the defendant. Well, we don't want those who are suing the city to get lots of money out of the city and either drive up taxes or keep us from paving potholes. So we can't be as transparent as we'd always want to be. We can't always tell the world, why did we do what we did? We try to do so when we can, and there's no legal cost, no litigation cost to the city. And you're going to find that you're going to have to do a balancing act. Sometimes you're going to be getting a memo from my office. I was out in Wimberley, Texas last week doing some training for their P&Z, and I was the first ever city attorney of Wimberley. What a thrill that was. A community that had been there forever, thousands of years. It existed one way or the other. And now in 2000, we're putting a government structure on top of an already existing city. It was a lot of fun for a much younger lawyer. And I remember showing up to a P&Z meeting where there was a controversial issue. A doctor from Houston was going to retire, and he bought a hilltop to build his mansion. Is he grandfathered or not? Does he have vested rights or not? What are we going to do? Well, no one blames a doctor for building a retirement home, right? That they deserve it. Except for when you're down in Wimberley Valley looking up at the hillside, you're going to be seeing less trees and more roof. And so I show up to my P&Z meeting 21 years ago in Wimberley, and I show up to a little sign-in table like y'all went through. Okay, sign in if you want to speak. Here's a copy of the agenda. Here's a copy of Alan's memo. My attorney-client privilege memo to the Wimberley P&Z was copied by some eager beaver at City Hall and given out for everyone to see. It said Alan's Law Firm at the top. It said confidential and privileged at the top. And yet over in the corner is the doctor and his Houston lawyer reading my memo about what the city should or should not do about the grandfathered status of this soon-to-be house on the hill. And that kind of inspired me to go, gosh, just putting attorney-client privilege may not be enough to help a client protect their own confidential material. Well, you might be the member of P&Z or ZBA or another group that gets some of this information from my firm or another one that represents the city. And when you do, you're being trusted to safeguard that and keep it to yourselves as part of the city's mission. And if you can't be trusted with it, let us know. And we will stop putting things in writing, for example. I think it's an ethical thing, which is one reason why it's on this slide and it's in our code of ordinances, that when you take the oath to work for the city of Bastrop, even as a volunteer, you have a duty to help us safeguard our information, to protect our staff, the people that rely on us, and also the city's legal position. And once you get beyond all the fluffy stuff, thou shalt avoid the appearance of impropriety, there are some rather specific things in our code of ethics. We define conflict of interest in Bastrop more strictly than the state of Texas does. So we even lower the threshold beyond what the state of Texas does regarding conflicts of interest, which means if you have a conflict, you have a duty to disclose it to the public by giving Ann Franklin, our city secretary, an affidavit, and you have a duty to abstain from talking about it or voting on it. The transaction may still go forward, but you yourself can't be involved if you've got a conflict as defined under our code. We have limitations on gifts that, again, are more stringent than the state law gift rule. We talk about the representation of others and limit your ability to represent others for money before the city of Bastrop if you are serving on the city of Bastrop. So if you're a realtor or a lawyer and that's how you make your money, you may want to actually pull our code and take a careful look at this and see if it's something that you're able to stay within. Improper influence, that's kind of an extension of state law. You can't go and tell people, don't worry, I'm on P&Z, I'll get this passed. You can't go to your neighbor and say, no, I'm on ZBA, I'm going to kill this for you, don't worry. Don't even bother coming to the hearing, I've got this. Well, if you're doing it for a friend, a neighbor, a family member, or you're doing it for money, that's improper influence. It's criminal under Texas law, but it also is punishable under Bastrop's Code of Ethics. Abuse of resources is very broad. The mayor is an engineer. How much great work could she do on her driveway if she had city equipment to do the work? And I've actually known individuals here in Central Texas that have, if not gone to jail, they've given up their job and paid a fine and left town because they were doing things like using backhoes and heavy equipment to actually improve their personal property when it was meant to be at a city yard somewhere only to be used for city purposes. That's a big deal. Neighbors can see you with the backhoe. They understand that. What you don't get is using city computers. I knew a planner who got indicted and spent a year defending himself and $40,000 because Travis County indicted him for misusing city services or equipment. What did he do? On a personal private computer, he sent an email regarding his own personal business, his side business, but he used his city-issued email address. What's the value of a digital blip that just goes through space? I don't know. I don't know how to value that. Travis County valued it at $800,000 because that was the value of the property his project was working with. That's a felony, folks, for an email, a digital blip. And so we cannot use the resources that are given to us by the city of Bastrop for our own personal needs, our own personal work. At Austin, routinely, if you watch the news, their own internal auditor is busting employees because they're selling, Amway at work or cosmetics at work. And their auditor's saying, you're violating this rule. Work is for work, not for this other stuff. Things many of us have done over time or used to. I'm terrified to take Girl Scout cookies to work anymore, depending on what city hall I'm going to because of rules like this. So just be cautious. Abuse of your official position is when you're using the fact that you are a Bastrop official to either try to deny a benefit to someone who otherwise would have it as a member of the public, or grant a favor to someone who's not entitled to it because no member of the public is entitled to it. And then there's a prohibition on subsequent employment for a year working on something that you worked on here. And that's more for the staff level. When it comes to implementing these rules, we have an ordinance that is a local law the City Council has adopted for our code. Training is in the code as being required. So I appreciate people voluntarily showing up for training, but it's actually a required part of our code for those that are covered. We have a board of ethics. Not every city does. Occasionally I help the city of Plano, and in Plano, if there's an ethics complaint, It goes to outside counsel to do an assessment, and then their answer goes to the city council, and the city council decides everything. Whether a violation occurred or not, whether to have a hearing, whether or not there's punishment. That's Plano, Texas. Here, your city council has created a separate board, which is our Board of Ethics, and they are the ones responsible for overseeing any initial inquiry into an allegation or a full-blown public hearing if we have those sorts of things. Here, the buck stops with the Board of Ethics. If you're unsure, maybe you're looking at the Code of Ethics and you think you may have a conflict of interest, or you want to come up here and you want to speak in favor of a variance for your mother's house, and you're not sure if that's against the Code of Ethics, we have a provision in our code that allows you to ask for an advisory opinion. So if you do that, for example, my office may be the one writing the advisory opinion, and if you get that and you rely on it, and 6 months from now somebody files an ethics complaint against you anyway, you have an affirmative defense. You can say, hey, wait a minute, I asked, they answered, I shouldn't be punished. And I would hope the Board of Ethics would dismiss it at that point in time. That's what our system is designed to do. We have a system for complaints. Anyone can turn in a complaint. There are specific requirements for the contents and for the form, and that's what starts the enforcement process, is the filing of a sworn complaint under oath. We have those preliminary hearings, which is basically a subcommittee meeting that allows the group to take a look and say, gosh, if I assume everything in this complaint is true, I've done no fact-finding, no hearings, if I assume the allegations are true, does it add up to a violation under our code? And if not, it gets dismissed. If the answer is yes, then we go forward with a formal public hearing, and there's some evidence put forward. People get to testify. The Board of Ethics gets to ask questions, and we see what they decide if there's a violation or not. I mentioned representation of full-time a few times. Perhaps this is one that y'all care about. If you're a current city official, it's a violation for you to represent any person, group, or entity before the city. Now, that does not preclude you from representing yourself or your property. And in this case, it doesn't matter if you're doing so for compensation or not. And so if you need to get an advocate for a group that you're with, you may need to find somebody else to do that, and you sit that out. And this is all premised on the notion that we should not be capitalizing on the influence we've gained through public service, at least not for a period of time when you're in public service. Now, for those of you not covered by Code of Ethics, I threw up a bunch of other things, and I give you the legal citations in case you want to go online and look. You can just Google these terms, and they're there. It's all available for free. It's all available online. It's never been easier for us to see the law than it is today. But we have a conflict of interest statute in Texas, 171 of the local government code. I was reading some cases just recently for another city I was helping that these rules were adopted in the 70s, the state conflict of interest. Before that, it was an absolute prohibition for a city official to have an interest in any contract that the city had with anybody for anything. You just couldn't do it. Lots of court cases on that. Then we get into the 1970s, the legislature adopts 171 that says, oh, you can have an interest in the contract, but you yourself can't talk about it or vote on doing it. And if once you disclose your interest, the rest of the city council votes to go ahead and issue that contract, it's a perfectly legal transaction here in Texas. So in Texas, a conflict of interest under state law means money. Do you have stock? Are you employed? Do you own a portion of the real estate? That's what 171 of the local government code talks about. Conflict of interest regarding plats. So any of you that are dealing with plats, whether you're with P&Z or maybe even ZBA, if you have an interest in that land or within 200 feet of that property, you have a conflict of interest under state law. You must disclose your interest and abstain from talking about it and voting on it. That's a very specific statute just on the platting of land, the carving up of land into individual lots to sell or convey. Banks, We have a special conflict of interest rule regarding banks. The city has to have one or more depositories for our public funds, and if you have an interest in that, then you would have to recuse yourself if you were on the deciding-making body. Here it's the city council. There's a nepotism rule, the rule that we cannot be hiring our relatives to work at City Hall. Because we're a home rule city with a city manager form of government, all the hiring and firing is handled by the city manager. So we can't be hiring relatives of the city managers, but he could do it for city council relatives because there's that buffer and space in between. Whether he would do so or no is a local policy choice. State law would allow that. We have financial disclosure rules. If contracts come before the city, before the council can vote on it, the council would have to disclose if they have an interest. The vendor would have to disclose if they have an interest, either family or financial or business interest with that city council member. Those are all public documents. Honoraria is a limitation on receiving a gift, a payment for speaking publicly, only because of your public interest. So if the mayor were to be invited to speak and paid big bucks to come speak, if they're inviting her because she's mayor, she could not do it. If they're inviting her because she's a top-notch civil engineer, you bet she could do it. Splitting hairs, I don't know. Let's just say a lot of the members of the Texas legislature get paid to give speeches, not because they're a state representative, but because they're really experts in whatever their profession happens to be. That's the way things work in Texas, I'll tell you. Lots of limitations on gifts, not if it's from a relative or a friend that you have a pre-existing relationship with, birthday presents, anniversary gifts from people you actually know. The problem would be if it's a vendor, somebody who wants an application approved, they want their variance approved, they're wanting to sell us parkland equipment. Those folks just handing out gifts would be illegal in Texas if it's over a certain dollar amount, and we're more strict on that dollar amount here in Bastrop than the state of Texas is. Oddly enough, wining and dining is still legal in Texas. As long as your host is taking you out to dinner and they're sitting there with you, buying the surf and turf and the wine and the cheese tray and all that, you don't have to declare it under state law. They have to declare it only if they're a registered lobbyist in the state. But this raises interesting questions for you because we have our gift law here in Bastrop, and I think wining and dining would fall under that gift law. It happens. Since I've been in Austin 25 years now, I've served in one volunteer board for the city of Austin where I live. I had worked in solid waste management as an undergrad in Lubbock, and so I come to Austin and I'm told there's a space on the City of Austin Solid Waste Advisory Commission. Well, y'all can already tell I love talking trash, so the chance to go and talk about landfills and collection and recycling, that was good stuff to me. And I did go. And at the time, Austin was going through some big changes on where they haul their trash. The city closing its landfill. You have several commercial landfills. The county, Travis County had a landfill. TDS over there in Creedmoor wants everybody's trash. And what happened is that the big trash haulers started inviting us, members of the Solid Waste Advisory Commission, out to lunch. And sure, I went to lunch with TDS. I never thought anything about it. And then I go out with another one, and and TDS never once talked about the contract, never talked about the vote, never talked about anything. Talked about sports, talked about the weather. It was dinner. Oh, this is nice. Another one took me out, and the whole time they were pressuring me to vote for them. What will it take to get your vote at the Solid Waste Advisory Commission to recommend to the City Council that they send X percentage of their trash to our landfill? And after a while, I just got sick of it. I didn't finish my meal. I stood up. I threw my 20 bucks on the table, said, y'all have a good afternoon, and walked out. Was I peeved because they were pressuring me? Was I insulted because they took me to Red Lobster? I mean, come on, if you're going to take me out and buy my vote, can we go to Eddie V's or somewhere really, really fancy? And I learned a lot as a human being about myself then, and just pretty much decided I'm not going to go out and do those sorts of things anymore. How about you? Are you going to take lunch? Are you going to take dinner? Are you going to let them lobby you individually? Are you going to wait until you're actually seated at a properly posted meeting and let them make their pitch in front of you and all of your neighbors at the same time? When in doubt what to do, you can look up the City of Bastrop's Code of Ethics. The answer could be in there. Or you could just ask yourself the question, which of these choices is going to result in citizens viewing City Hall as having more integrity or less integrity? Are they going to think that I am more trustworthy and honest or less trustworthy and honest? And if you just can't see telling your neighbors that you went out to lunch and dinner with someone and then later voted on their application, their permit, their contract, maybe you just buy your own lunch. Maybe you just kind of pick up your own check, or you don't go at all. You say thank you, but if you want to meet with me one-on-one, I'll meet you at City Hall. They've got a conference room. They'll make a room reservation for me. You have to think about that for yourself. And I've come a long way since I was a much younger person, younger attorney. And now we have things like social media, where everything we do lives on forever and ever and ever. Everybody knows everything that we do. Think about those lunches, think about those dinners, think about those coffee talks. It may not be the way you want to make decisions or be influenced. But it's perfectly legal in Texas. But that's one of those things where I get to say as a lawyer, yeah, it's legal to do it. Doesn't make it right. And you have to think of what's right for you, right for the city, the mayor who appointed you, right for the people of Bastrop. There's, of course, good old-fashioned bribery in Texas. I've had more visits from the Texas Rangers than I've wanted to. Quite the intimidating group of men and women when they're investigating a city official for bribery. Coercion is when you're using your public position to try to force someone to do something or not do it. I've seen mayors try to coerce chiefs of police to drop investigations. I've seen city council members coerce city staff to try to get them to approve permits. We can't be doing that. They do tend to be enforced. A big one these days, misuse of information. Misuse of information. Golly, it's been 20 years when I was first hired to be city attorney of Bastrop. Bastrop, my brain. Dripping Springs. I'm no longer city attorney of Dripping Springs, but it was 20 years ago that I was their city attorney. The one and only question the mayor pro tem asked me during my job interview, Alan, do you or any of your family own real estate in Dripping Springs? No, sir. Mayor, I moved to hire this guy. That was it. I had a law degree and no conflicts. But over that 17 years that I was city attorney, they built their very first sewer system ever. They completely revamped their code of ordinances. I know where all the roads are going to be widened because I was doing all the contracts with TxDOT. I knew from being city attorney where I could buy land cheap today as an old bungalow house, knowing tomorrow that's going to be commercial real estate. I could have made a fortune. I did not do any of that because that would have been wrong, it would have been unethical, and it would have been illegal. Well, the same is true for everyone in this room. If you're learning information only because of your position at City Hall, it's not public information. It is criminal for you to then go and profit on that information, to go get your brother-in-law to invest because you heard where the sewer lines are going, or you know you're going to be recommending rezoning to the city council. Quick, go invest next to this now. Property values are going to shoot through the roof. You can't do that. I can't do that. It's the wrong thing to do. The public doesn't have that knowledge, so why should we be able to trade on our volunteer time? And of course, obstruction and retaliation, trying to stop public officials from doing their job. All of these things are all located in the penal code. So in closing, what I want to urge you to consider is what my firm uses as our own mantra internally. Democracy is a process. We try not to focus too much on the results or the outcome. We try to focus on the process that's used to get to that outcome. If you do that, chances are you'll be a better, more ethical actor at City Hall. We hope you share the city's values, and if you're curious about them, just look at the beginning of the Code of Ethics. The council put them right out there. Do what you can, meeting by meeting, vote by vote, to earn the public's trust. Heck, I bet you have it right now. So the question is, are you going to lose it, or are you going to hold on to it? And once you start chipping away at that trust, it's hard to earn it back, perhaps impossible. There's going to be rules. We have some rules in the Code of Ethics. I'm going to pivot here in a little while and talk about rules for open meetings and open records. You're going to have to follow those as well. Try to avoid even the appearance of impropriety. There was a matter before Bastrop not long ago that I had no conflict of interest, not under state law, not under the ethics rules that govern lawyers, not under the ethics rules that govern prosecutors. I did not have a conflict of interest. I absolutely recused myself and stepped aside. Why? It was the right thing to do. And even though I didn't violate any technical rule by going forward, there were some in the city limits that would think it was improper for me to do what I was doing and question my objectivity. So I stepped aside, let somebody else do that work, do that project. You may need to do that also as time goes on. Training. It's the best way to be an ethical person. Read about it, talk about it. Assume everything that we do will be known. And in this age of social media, we've seen it right here in this room, where citizens go find some scrap of information about one of us, and they go and they broadcast it on Facebook, and they come and they pound this podium accusing us of one thing or another. Well, if they're just making up stuff, there's not much I can do about it. But I know, in fact, how I behave myself when I step out of the house every day, and it's not in a way that's going to bring shame on Mayor Connie. So if you can say the same thing, I think you'll get through this without any unnecessary hassles and headaches. I myself have been accused of ethics infractions before. They were all dismissed, but it is no fun. And more I see citizens using ethics as a weapon because they can't achieve their result politically or socially or legally, and maybe they just want to bring some pain on yours truly. That's okay. I still love my job and show up every day for it. I will do my best to protect y'all from that sort of thing as long as you're trying to follow these kind of rules and looking out for the city organization and looking out for your neighbors. And so that is it for the ethics portion of our conversation. Do you have any questions or anything else you want to bring up on this topic before we shift? It gets even more interesting as we go, I promise. You want to do the open government one, Colin? I think that's a good transition. And I'll take a break in between open records and open meetings, so if y'all can go to a bio break, or if you need to just step out, feel free to do it on your own. All right, open government. This goes to the heart of everything y'all are going to do. Your meetings are covered by the state statute. Every digital blip you ever type or send about city business is covered by the statute. It gets a little bit complicated, but I'm trying to make it as simple as I can so you see how this stuff applies to you. You'll forget most of what I tell you. You got your handouts. That'll help you remember a few things. But you also have these 5 tips. Assume all data is public. So if you're getting information because of whatever board or commission you're serving on, assume that is public data that we have to do certain things with. Don't think it's private, personal, and you can hide it. Number 2, think before you create. Best advice I can give you under open records. Before you hit send, you hit post, before you even go on social media and hit like, think for just that split second, is this the right thing to do? Am I helping the city of Bastrop, or am I hurting myself in the city of Bastrop? Just think before you create. I often will create documents and never send them. I save them, come back the next day, look at them, delete. Give yourself, build into your process that moment of pause. When it comes to gatherings, assume the Open Meetings Act applies. Sometimes there are exceptions, but if you've got a group of people from your board or commission together, be wondering in the back of your mind, does the Open Meetings Act apply? If so, there's some rules that kick in, and you're going to know those rules before you leave here tonight. Oops. Okay, I don't remember what I did. There we go. Private devices can have public information. I'll spend some more time on this one, but just kind of go ahead and start wrapping your brain around the idea that your personal private device might be something of interest to me and our city secretary. And the 5th one, be wary of email, text messages, nextdoor.com, all of that stuff, social media, text messages, and emails. The laws that apply to filing cabinets in Anne Franklin's office also applies to text messages. And so you want to be cautious on how you go about using these things. So let's get started. That was Anne Franklin's office before I showed up, right, Anne? No. If I had a client with that kind of filing system, I've already promised my kiddo, if she just keeps her grades up, I'll pay for her to go to a nice state school when she goes to college. If I had those kind of records at clients' houses, she can go to private school. I'll be working forever with all the lawsuits and open records requests we have to deal with. I say open records because that's what the statute was originally called. It was the Open Records Act. When it was passed in the 70s, it was all about paper, paper, paper. In 1995, they amended the statute to be the Public Information Act, recognizing it covers data no matter what form it is. It is so incredibly broad, and it covers information that the city creates, that is created for the city, maybe hire an architect or an engineer, a financial advisor, a lawyer. Well, their office could be states away, but this statute will reach across those state lines to get a hold of their filing cabinets. It also will apply to information that's just given to the city that the city didn't even want. Are you applying for a permit? Are you wanting a contract? We get other people's data all the time, and then we have to do something with it because, yes, we're in the pothole business, the police business, the fire business. We're absolutely water and sewer business. We're in the parks and rec business. We're in the records business. That is something the legislature has forced us into, and y'all are now part of it. So enjoy. Whether it's data from applicants, vendors, volunteers, employees, consultants, or our elected officials, it is all covered by the Public Information Act. Formats doesn't matter. Is it paper in a binder in a folder? Is it video that only exists on the police department dash cam or body-worn cameras or the video cameras firefighters have? Audio, absolutely, and all forms of digital. It's incredibly broad. The statute doesn't care how the data was created or what form it's in. It cares that we have it and we're using it for public business. What does Ann and the rest of the folks at City Hall have to do? We have a statutory duty to compile all this data somehow. Sometimes we don't even know it exists. We have to retain it, archive it for a period of time. That period of time changes. Guess for me, how long must Ann hold on to a regular business-related email for the city of Bastrop? What is the soonest we can delete that blip? 10 years? Good guess. 25? It's a long time. 7? 2 years. We can't, just whatever email passes around regarding a plat or improvements at the park, we have to hold on to that email for at least 2 years. So ask yourself this question, before you hit send, are you ready to own what you wrote in an email for 2 years? Are you ready for Ann and the city of Bastrop to own what you wrote for 2 years? I once had a client sued by a property owner upset about eminent domain and a plat. And they sued the city, and then just for fun, they sued the mayor, city manager, and me. How fun that was for me. 5 years later, to be in a courtroom looking at the big screen on the wall and seeing an email I had written 5 years earlier. I felt that was an intrusion. I felt it was an accusation. I felt it was just terrible. But then when all was said and done, I stood by every single word I put in that email. I'd write the exact same email again today. Ultimately, all the individuals were dismissed from the lawsuit. It settled and went away. But there was a lesson learned there that I'm passing on to you. The need for you and the city to have to own these digital blips long after sometimes you've moved on in public service. You've forgotten about that issue. And if you're not ready to own the words or the attitude that you're conveying through your words, why are you hitting send? Rethink that message. Maybe you don't want to do that. And the last thing that Ann and her crew has to do is eventually provide that data. And sometimes you're providing it to good citizens who want to understand how government works. They want to understand how the money's being spent. Sometimes you're providing to people who hate you, or they hate me, or they're political opponents, or it's a name we don't recognize, and it's really a paralegal for a plaintiff's firm who's going to sue us for millions. And before we've been sued, we don't know who they are. We have to hand over all this data. And it matters with boards and commissions. There have been court cases nationwide where a city council approval of a zoning change was overturned by the court 2 years later. What did the city council do wrong? Nothing. But the Planning and Zoning Commission emailed back and forth among each other about how are you going to vote on Wednesday? I don't know. I'm going to vote this way. I like this part. Oh, I don't like that part. They completely deliberated the action over email outside of a meeting. Eventually, those emails were disclosed under open records and proved an open meetings violation. And because of that, the city council's vote was on shaky ground, and the court just threw it all out. So imagine making a zoning decision. Imagine being the property owner and getting a zoning decision, and a court undoing it 2 years later. What do you even do with that? That sort of complexity comes to play with what we do, which is why we have this training and ask you to come here today, and others will be watching the video, so as not to violate open meetings or open records and make this all come tumbling down, because it's not just a hypothetical, it actually does happen. I mentioned the personal versus official, the fact that a private device can have public information. It used to be every time a client would ask me the question, I had to go through this kind of checklist. Who bought the iPhone? Who pays for the service to that Android? How is it used? Who has access to it? What kind of data is on it? And depending on the answer to that, whether there's the old school day planner, paper calendar, or a brand new iPad, the analysis was the same. Now, none of that garbage matters. The legislature has changed everything as of 2019 to say, we don't care who paid for the device, whether you have T-Mobile or AT&T, we don't care. Do you have city business on your phone, on your laptop, on your hard drive, on your desktop computer in your guest room back at your house? If you do, we are responsible for that. And you have a duty to give it to us so that we can give it to somebody who hates us, wants to sue, wants to run against you, whatever that answer is. And here's the kicker. If you don't hand it over and give it to the records custodian, which is our beloved Anne Franklin, the law says you automatically are individual records custodians. So what you have on your phone or your iPad or your laptop, if you haven't given it to us so that we can handle it, you must handle it, which means when there's open records request, you have a duty to hand it over. And if you don't, the city can sue you to get it, or the requester can sue you to get it, or the county attorney or district attorney get involved. And so this is all the legislature's remedy to certain city officials. In Travis County, there was a county commissioner who was being sued because he was texting with developers. And when asked for his texts, he's like, no, it's mine. It's on my phone, my service, I'm not handing it over. And the county is like saying, hey, district attorney, stop looking at us. We can't force him to hand it over. We asked him nicely. We asked him sternly. He wouldn't hand it over. So the legislature comes back and gives us this. So, you know, I have a business email. I use that for business. I have a personal email. I use that for personal. I don't mix up the two. I don't do it. If you're worried about what I do with text messages, practicing law by text, it's easy. I don't ever practice law by text. Clients will email me or text me wanting a legal answer, and I call them. Or they'll text me, and I'll email them. Why? I don't want to keep up with text messages. I don't want to save them. I don't want to give them to Ann. I want Ann. Raise your hand if you want Ann reading your text messages. What? She's nice. What are you worried about? If you don't want to keep up with it, then you have to be careful with it. And so if you're doing city business from home, keep your drives to yourself, keep your folders to yourself. If you have something important, a developer, an applicant emails you, fine, forward it to your liaison for your committee or your board or your commission. Forward it to the city secretary. You now can delete it from your machine because the city now has a record of it. If you don't do that, you've become an archivist. Are you prepared for that? Are you trained for that? Probably not, but the legislature in 2019 put us all into this business. There are lots of exceptions to handing things over. If it's confidential and privileged, please do better than whoever that was in Wimberley 20 years ago who just handed it out. If you see confidential privilege, that should mean something to you. Be cautious. If it's regarding law stuff or litigation stuff, don't be so quick to hand it over. We may have a basis to withhold it from the public. If it would affect our ability to buy or sell real estate and get a good price, we can withhold that information from the public. Same with economic development. If telling the whole world what kind of deal we're working on could blow the deal, then we can keep that confidential until the deal is inked. Once it's signed and approved, or once the deal dies, all that public information comes forward. So it's only a temporary amount of time that we can withhold it. We have the ability to withhold data regarding security measures. If you've seen it in the newspaper nationwide, increasingly, you see people are infiltrating water systems, wastewater system, electric systems, and getting into some mischief. It's a form of domestic terrorism. And so believe me, we safeguard our facilities and our data here with the city of Bastrop. Anything dealing with medical data, juveniles, crime victims may have some measure of protection under Texas law, so we're very careful in scrutinizing those before we hand them out. Third-party financial data, all those companies trying to get a contract for trash service or for landfill services are always competing against each other. We don't want to hand over somebody else's competitive trade secret information. We tend to go to the Attorney General's office for a ruling before we release any of that. And then one of my favorite bullets is that bottom one. It's called agency memoranda, the deliberative process privilege. Y'all have all heard of the attorney-client privilege, right? You've got the doctor-patient privilege. You've got the pastor-penitent privilege with your preacher, the spousal privilege, these privileges that exist that can keep someone from having to hand over data or testify. Well, we have one called the deliberative process privilege, which means as the legislative body, the city council has a right to hear candid information from their staff, advisors, and consultants before they make a legislative decision, which means we can defeat an open records request prior to a decision being made. But once that vote is made, we're approving the rezoning ordinance. We're denying the rezoning ordinance. A new request comes in, that information is public. And that's why when staff and I make certain recommendations to staff, to you, to the city council, we will say privileged internal only to remind people not just to hand it out. We may have an argument for withholding it if we have a need for withholding it. When it comes to the confidential stuff, it's very, very broad, and we want you to be careful with what you protect. Remember, the Public Information Act is broad and covers lots of different types of data in different forms. If you think before you create, that will help. My one and only trip, once, I'm undefeated at the Texas Supreme Court as a lawyer. I've been one time. I went one time, I won, I quit, I'll never go again. And it was on open records, and it was on this issue, where the city of Georgetown had an important memo written by an engineer to the city attorney. They were already in lawsuits, and they expected more lawsuits, and yet the Attorney General's office ordered them to release it. The trial court ordered them to release it. We had to go all the way to the Supreme Court. And questions were being asked about how can the taxpayers rest at ease if the folks who sit up here at the big table are making million-dollar decisions without the advice of legal advice. And at that point, the attorney for the Austin American-Statesman said, well, Your Honor, there's nothing that requires government lawyers to give their advice in writing. So what, I'm supposed to just whisper in the ear of the mayor, whisper to the city manager, never write an email, never write a memo, never hire a consulting expert to help with the case? That is ridiculous. And so we think about the privilege and confidentiality a lot, because if you're careless with it, you tend to lose it, and there are confidences. And so we try to protect that information. And if you are careless with the Open Records Act, it could have civil consequences, like the zoning case I told you being undone. There are civil penalties under the statute. There are criminal penalties under the statute. A county judge in Montgomery County and a county commissioner were indicted under an open meetings allegation, which I'll talk about next. The proof that was used against them was gathered under open records. So there are different statutes, but sometimes people will go after data on one side and use it on another. If you follow these basic rules, you'll be okay. And if you have questions, get answers. I'm here to help. Your city secretary knows what she's doing. City management staff and your staff liaison will be there to help you. And so that is it for the open records part. Do y'all have any questions about records, data, email, nextdoor.com? All of that can be public information that we have a duty to hold on to and hand over to those we really don't want to share it with. So we're very careful about those kinds of things. Do y'all want to take a break or press forward? So why don't we take a 10-minute break and come back at, what is it, 40 till? 40 after, so 20 till. Okay, y'all want to press forward? Now we'll jump into the open meetings part of this, the flip side of the open government coin. You start off with kind of a strange inquiry. What is a meeting? We all think we know, but under the statute, there's a very specific definition, and I've kind of boiled it down to these things. Do you have a gathering of these 5 things? You got a gathering of a quorum of a governing body where someone's talking about some sort of business you have jurisdiction over. So technically under the statute, you have to have those 5 prongs for it to be a meeting. So if you keep that in mind, you'll know whether you should be complying with the statute or you're free just to have the conversation. So if the entire city council of Bastrop gets together at Connie's house this weekend, but all they talk about is the Dallas Cowboys, they're in the clear.
We would not be discussing the Dallas Cowboys.
But you could.
Texas Longhorns, but not the Dallas.
You're getting a little close. I can only think of one city council that cannot gather at the mayor's house on a Sunday or Saturday and talk about the Dallas Cowboys. City of? Arlington. Arlington. I do the occasional legal project for them. I'm doing redistricting for Arlington right now. I did redistricting for Arlington 10 years ago because Arlington has single member districts from where the city council members are elected. We in Bastrop are at large. That's what our voters chose. So I drove all the way from Austin to Arlington 10 years ago, suit and tie, ready to talk about redistricting. And the Arlington City Council couldn't wait for me to get through so I could go sit down and they could talk about what they really wanted to talk about. A Tier 1 terrorist level event. The Super Bowl. The Super Bowl is coming to AT&T Jones Stadium, and that is a Tier 1 terrorist threat event. And the city of Arlington was closed all the utility hole covers, removing the trash cans, getting rid of mailboxes and installing video cameras and all of that stuff. City of Arlington used their power of eminent domain and economic development and land use to help make that stadium possible. The city council has a skybox at AT&T Stadium. Isn't that incredible? Do you have a skybox somewhere? Where's our luxury skybox, Mayor? Maybe I'd say I'm city attorney of the wrong city, but I know the city attorney of Arlington. They never get invited to the luxury skybox. I don't know. Who wants to go party and drink and take your lawyer along? I guess nobody. Arlington can't talk about the Dallas Cowboys, but everybody else can. So that last bullet there is really the most important one. I once gave a version of this talk for Texas Municipal League. We were at King Ranch, outside, barbecue. My podium was the bed of a pickup truck. I'm loving this Texas experience. And I couldn't see the audience because it was all dark. And I was giving this talk, and someone hollers out, "You're saying I can't be friends with Bubba anymore." Like, God, this is perfect. Barbecue, pickup truck, Bubba, King Ranch. I love this job. Of course you can. Just don't get all the Bubbas together and talk about city business unless you're going to comply with this statute. If you're going to talk about city business and you have jurisdiction over it, well, then that's a problem under the Open Meetings Act. And if y'all all want to go to the movies, we got a movie theater, go to the movies. That's fine, because there's no talking in movies. So you can't talk, you can't violate this statute. But other times you can. The Texas Education Agency, right? They get to decide what textbooks my kid gets to read in school. They violated this statute because they were all at the same restaurant talking about TEA business. They weren't even sitting next to each other. They were sitting at different tables, and passing notes or whispering table to table. Isn't that crazy? You know who turned them in? Their employees. Absolutely, their employees ratted them out. The Barra Medina Atascosa Underground Water Authority had a gathering at a barn one Sunday. They were all charged with violating the Open Meetings Act. It wasn't their barn. They didn't organize it. They didn't invite anyone. The farmers invited them to come out there on a Saturday. They just showed up. Oh, wow, look, there's a quorum here. They didn't sit together, but one would ask a question and another one would offer an answer. They were found to have violated the Open Meetings Act. It wasn't even their circus, but it was their monkeys. And they showed up with a quorum and talked about pumping water out of the earth. That's something they have jurisdiction over. The entire city council got together, is either Euless or Irving, I forget, I disparage one or the other, on a Sunday morning, and the DA investigated. You can read about it on the front page of the Dallas Morning News. When the DA concluded their investigation, he concluded that the only thing that happened at the mayor's house on that Sunday morning was the mass consumption of orange juice and waffles. I don't know why orange. I'm a pancakes and coffee guy, but that day, that's all they found. They found no evidence. They talked about city business. Who ratted them out? The members of the city council who are not invited to brunch. And so you just never know who's watching, and with social media, it happens more and more. But if you have those 5 prongs, you have a meeting. Well, what does that mean? It's not that hard. It means you have to comply with the Open Meetings Act. The Texas Open Meetings Act, also adopted since the 70s, is something we should all be pretty used to here. The only locational requirement is if you're going to have a Texas meeting, it needs to be in Texas. Is that a big deal? I don't know. When I was a young intern at City of Lubbock, it was no big deal to see the city council go on a retreat to Ruidosa. Just 3.5 hours away. It's a short little jump. You're in the cool pines. It's beautiful, creative. Now you can't do that. Apparently New Mexico's a different state. We can't do that. But the Lubbock City Council can drive to South Padre further and do the exact same thing. So we have to have our meetings within the state of Texas. The quorum is the big deal. In Texas, historically, even before the Open Meetings Act, the courts always said for a government to act, it has to act through its legislative body. And the legislative body can only act at a meeting. All right, well, we've got a meeting. How do you comply with those things? We'll go into the details here in a minute. Exempt are social gatherings. So gathering at the mayor's house for the pancakes and waffles, purely social, no discussion of city business, not a problem. A retirement party for a distinguished public servant, probably the same thing. Are you going to a regional conference, Texas Municipal League, the Central Texas Council of Governments, or we're in CapCog here, those are fine. Even if all of you show up, you forgot to post an agenda, no worries. You're not there to deliberate, you're there to learn, just like we're doing here today. Advisory boards that are purely advisory are not covered under state law, except for the fact that we here in Bastrop make the choice to go ahead and make you comply with the Open Meetings Act. It keeps everything clean, and sometimes advisory boards change. In Dripping Springs, we had a Park and Rec Commission, purely advisory. Council could reject any recommendation the Parks and Rec Board ever made. But over time, you saw proposals to give Parks and Rec the authority to hire some of the park staff, to adopt rules on public camping, or who gets to use the concession stand. Over time, you saw an advisory board start to morph into something more than an advisory board, which is okay, but they have to comply with the Open Meetings Act. So let's just put it in the ordinance. Parks and Rec Board has to comply with the Open Meetings Act, and that's what we do in Bastrop. Oddly enough, staff meetings are not covered at all. So when our city manager gets all of his department heads together in a room and they hash out what's going to be happening, the public has no right to go in there and watch or listen. No right under state law. One thing we worry about a lot, particularly those of us that are lawyers in this field, is action without meetings. You have to be very cautious not to do that. Old school example, City of San Antonio. All the players have changed, so I'm not disparaging anybody. But City of San Antonio, kind of like we have community support contracts that we do here with the Opry House and what else do we do? We used to do it with the YMCA and other groups that provide a public service that we could do it, but we choose to contract with them to do it. And so it's a contract with a grant. We do some of that here in Bastrop. They did a lot of it in San Antonio. And a new city council member got elected once upon a time, and he came out and said, you know what, I've looked at the budget for last year, and y'all gave a grant to a group that is against everything I stand for. I do not support this group. I will not be voting to support them, and I'm not gonna. And he put it in writing on City of San Antonio letterhead. He pulled out a pen and signed his name to it and passed it around. And eventually, 1, 2, 3, 4, a quorum of the San Antonio City Council signed the same letter. And surprise, surprise, when budget time came around, that nonprofit did not get their allocation. They did not get their grant from the City of San Antonio. I forget the name of the organization. The case is Esperanza versus City of San Antonio. They are the gay and lesbian group in San Antonio. And my experience with those groups in other cities, they tend to be very well organized, very well funded, very professional organizations, and not prone to taking this sort of treatment. So you can imagine they sued the City of San Antonio for violating the Open Meetings Act by signing that letter. They made a decision without going through a public meeting. They won at trial, they won on appeal, permanent injunction against the City of San Antonio, plus San Antonio got to pay their legal fees and court costs. So that wasn't criminal, that was civil, but it's still a pretty good slap on the wrist for the City of San Antonio. Now take that same fact pattern and imagine email or text messaging. Or one of you goes and posts on Facebook, hey, this vote's coming up on a development project on Thursday, and I'm absolutely against it. I am for the neighbors and against this person. And then another member of your board or commission goes on and likes what you wrote. And another one wrote on and said, absolutely, I looked into this. I don't trust these people. I'm voting against it. 1, 2, 3, 4. After a while, there's a quorum that's made a decision about a piece of public business they have jurisdiction on, and they did it outside of a meeting. They did it on Nextdoor or some other platform where now there's a digital paper trail that can be used for their prosecution. So you have to avoid that. When I email the Bastrop City Council, I always email myself. I'll CC Paul. He needs to know. He's the city manager. But then I blind copy the city council because there's no way they can use my email to reply to all and start violating this statute through electronic means. We've got several instances of that in this presentation that I'll use to warn you about email and text messaging. It is so easy, it's so convenient. You can be quick, you just get right back to that person right away. Maybe being quick to respond is not the thing we should be doing always, particularly if there's a risk that what we're really doing is deliberating. And who's taking your email, it's just between the two of you, and forwarding it to another member of the board, to another member of the board, to another member of the board. You've got to be cautious under the statute. When it comes to the meeting dynamics, we have regular meetings and then we have special meetings. What's special about a meeting? Nothing at all. It's just another meeting that occurs at a different time or date than your usual meeting location. We can have open session or closed session. Closed session we tend to call executive session, and there's usually a city only has 6 exceptions that allow them to meet behind closed doors. But we're special because we're Bastrop. We have a 7th that comes with having your own electric utility. So if it's about competitive electric matters, we can go behind closed doors. But the big ones are, my favorite, consultation with your attorney. You can go behind closed doors at any point in your meeting to talk to the lawyer about any legal stuff. If you think you need a lawyer to attend your meeting, you better tell your liaison in advance, because we don't always attend board and commission meetings, but that can be arranged if it's necessary. Personnel matters regarding officers and employees. So it's not just about employees, anyone who's considered an officer of the city. Economic development, I mentioned under open records, we could keep data out of the public's hands if releasing it would blow the deal. Well, same thing about discussing the deal. Incentives, are we giving them real estate, building roads, enticing someone to stay in Bastrop, enticing someone to come to Bastrop? We can discuss those things in executive session. Final action has to take place in open session as always. Real estate, are we buying or selling real estate? If the whole world knows what we need, when we need it, where we need it, and how much we're going to pay for it, we're not going to get a good deal on that piece of property or how much we're going to sell it for. So we can deliberate property in closed session. And then, of course, security comes up. I've worked for many entities over time that have had bomb threats. And of course, these days we worry about things like active shooters, so occasionally we have to go behind closed doors and talk about those security threats and how we're going to respond to those sorts of things. And gifts does not come up often, but it does occasionally come up. And if discussing whether you will accept a gift or not might alienate the donor, you can go behind closed session and talk about it. My favorite example is, again, from Dripping Springs, where a family that had been there for generations donated a piece of property that was valued at $1 million. It was a $1 million gift. The donor had certain strings attached to how that gift would be used and their involvement with the land going forward. Ultimately, the city accepted that gift, and now it's known as Charo Ranch Park. If you ever find yourself in Dripping Springs, it is a beautiful nature park, birding, walking, biking. That's kind of the extent of what you're allowed to do at Charo Ranch Park. I assume the donor got $1 million tax write-off for that generous gift. So occasionally we do get to use that one. And then, of course, I already mentioned the competitive electricity exception. We can have joint meetings, and we do have joint meetings. I've had councils meet with LCRA before in the same room, 2 agendas, 2 sets of minutes. We have joint meetings with planning and zoning, don't we, Mayor? We have joint meetings with the BEDC Board of Directors from time to time. That's a good thing to help everyone be on the same page, maybe achieve some alignment in our goals and in our missions. And sometimes you've got a project, you got to hurry. So I've had P&Z approve something at 5 o'clock and City Council approve it at 6 o'clock. Sometimes we schedule things just that way. One of my favorite aspects of open meetings is the ratification bullet. If you screw something up at your meeting, there may be a chance to have a second meeting and come back and fix it. Maybe the motion wasn't quite right. Maybe the agenda language wasn't quite right. We do have a chance to come back and ratify sometimes to correct any technical glitch or error we made with our meetings. When it comes to excluding people, the public is open to public sessions. When it comes to executive sessions, only the board or the committee or the city council has a right to be in there, plus the liaison or staff or any consultants. If we had a city council executive session, but we really needed the chair of P&Z back there with us, that we could make that happen because they are in alignment. They are a subsidiary of the city of Bastrop. I always want to warn you that don't assume just because you heard something in executive session means it's confidential. It's not always true. If I give you my memo about the perils of letting a doctor build his dream house on the hilltop, be careful with my memo. That's clearly confidential and privileged. It says so. But just the fact someone says something doesn't mean under state law you can come out and blab your head off. Fortunately for us, disclosing confidential information received in executive session is itself actually a violation of the Code of Ethics in Bastrop. And so you may not have a problem under law enforcement, but you may have an ethics problem if you disclose that. So I'm a big believer on respecting the sanctity of executive session. And if you just can't keep confidences, then don't go into executive session. Just say, I'm not going to go, I'm not going to do it, because I'm not going to promise to be quiet about it. And that's your right as an individual person. So now, what are the real details? What do you have to do if you're in a meeting? The first thing you have to have is an agenda. It's not complicated. It doesn't have to be overly detailed. It just covers the basics. Who, what, where, when. Who's gathering? Where are they going to be located? What time does it start? What are they going to talk about? That's what an agenda has to say, because we are limited. We can only deliberate, talk on, vote on things that are listed on the agenda. If it's not on the agenda, it is not a conversation topic. So we have to get this right, and we have to get it right in advance. Agendas must go up at least 72 hours in advance and be continuously available in physical space, like our nice bulletin board outside. I can see it right through the narrow window. And it has to be online also, both places, for 72 hours. We put ours up earlier than that, don't we, Ann? Yeah. Council made that policy decision to put it up earlier than the 72 hours, which in part makes it available to the council in advance so they can read it and go through it, but also the citizens have more time to know, should I be paying attention to this council meeting or not? In terms of the level of specificity that's required for an agenda, it's the reasonable person standard. Raise your hand if you're the only reasonable person in the room. The person to your right or left is a reasonable person? I'm not quite sure what a reasonable person is, but this is what the statute says. I think it just really means an average, everyday person who's not necessarily an insider at City Hall could read the agenda and understand what you're talking about and decide, do I care or do I not care? And so if it's very confusing, agenda item number 7, personnel matters. All right, I have no idea what we're going to go talk about. That doesn't say anything. Disciplinary action on employee. I still don't know what we're going to talk about. You got to put more meat on the bone. Approved plat. For whom, for where. And so we have to put a little bit more. We do not have to put every possible consequence that may come up, any action that's conceivable. But the subject matter has to be there. We bought a new fire truck recently. I think it cost like $10,000 or $20,000 maybe. It was a little higher? All right, so a couple $1 million. So, procuring a type of fire truck for the Bastrop Fire Department needs to be on the agenda. Are we going to buy it? Are we going to lease it? Are we going to borrow it? You don't have to put that on the agenda, the consequence, the action. It's the subject matter that has to be on there. Therefore, anyone who cares about the fire department or fire trucks, know they better ask for more information or show up to the meeting so they can hear what's going on. And so as long as a reasonable person knows the topic, the consequence could be approving a contract, passing an ordinance, passing a resolution. We here in Bastrop tend to give more detailed notice in advance than the law actually requires us to do, which is a good thing in furtherance of transparency. When you walk into a council meeting and you just see report from city manager, well, as long as it's general stuff about what's going on in the community, events that have occurred, initiatives that are coming up at future meetings, we can talk about those sorts of things. To actually dig into the details of an item, that's too vague because no one can just see police chief report and know what the chief is going to talk about. So we give more details than that. Fortunately, we have the ability to recess to the next day if a meeting goes long. Fortunately, we don't need to do that. But I have been at council meetings elsewhere where come 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning, people are falling asleep at the dais. We just have to come back the next day at 8 o'clock. You can do that without having posted for the next day. And then thank goodness we have the ability to do video conferencing. We have always had the ability for several years to do video conferencing. It came in quite handy during the pandemic, but the governor actually passed an emergency order that suspended very specific parts of the Open Meetings Act, making it even easier to have a video meeting. So while video meetings are allowed, it's not always what staff prefers because the mechanics and logistics of making it happen can be kind of rough. To have a video meeting, regardless of the pandemic, you have to have a quorum gathered at the same location. You have to have the chairperson at the public location where citizens can come. And then you have to have the audio-video technology set up so that anybody that speaks can see and hear everybody else that speaks. So the entire city council, whether they're video or in person, have to be able to see and hear each other. Citizens have to be able to see and hear the city council. And any member of the public who walks up and speaks at the microphone has to be able to see and hear everybody. Once I had a client that just took an iPad and duct taped it to the headrest of a chair and put the councilman's name there, and that was it. The microphone was right there. Kind of a low-tech solution. I don't think that would work today because now the Texas Department of Information Resources, they keep changing their name, now has promulgated the technical specifications we're supposed to comply with for video conferencing. So it's an option. It's there for your board, your commission under the law. It's not always something we can mechanically pull off here at City Hall. You've got your agenda, you've got minutes. What are minutes? They are an agenda with answers. That's it. Who showed up? What did they talk about? When did they show up? Where were they? They do not have to be long or detailed. Sometimes we make them more detailed than they have to be. A verbatim transcript with someone sitting there typing every utterance is not required. But I have city councils elsewhere who want that. I know of city secretaries, don't gasp, man, you know them too. They spend up to 30 to 40% of their time typing up minutes. That's all they do. They're a stenographer of sorts. If you videotape or audio tape, sometimes you don't need that level of detail to be typed because you can always go back to the tapes. Your individual notes and recordings, when you're taking notes at meetings, remember public records, we just talked about those, you're creating a record. Are you sure you want to do that? Wow, this developer attorney is a real idiot. I can't believe they graduated law school. Okay, that may be true. Did you want to memorialize that and have to give it to Anne Franklin someday so she can give it to the developer's lawyer when they sue because we didn't give them their permit? I don't know, maybe. Think about that. You cannot make your own notes or recordings of executive session, though. When you go into executive session, there's only one recording or one set of notes. It's the official set of notes or the official recording, and that's it. So you're not allowed to do that under the law. Video conferencing, I already covered that stuff, more detailed. This one is one worth paying attention to. Have you ever heard of a walking quorum or a daisy chain? This notion of getting together and talking about your public business in a group outside of a meeting or one-on-one, but after a while, it adds up to a quorum. That's actually punishable under the Open Meetings Act. And what they really do is they do redefine what a deliberation means for purposes of criminal punishment. So if one of you on your board talks to somebody else on your board, not at a meeting, but you know that after a while, the chain of who talked to whom is going to add up to a quorum, you're guilty of violating the Open Meetings Act. How do you know that? It depends on the situation. But I once, read about the city of El Paso, where I'm from, where the mayor and a council member talked to each other, and then the mayor went upstairs to a different office with a different council member, and then him and that council member went downstairs and talked to another council member, and then they went and talked to a neighborhood association, and then went to another floor and talked to a different council member. How do I know this? Reporters were in the hallway the whole time recording all of this. And after a while, it added up to a quorum. And eventually, who is it? Texas Rangers. They got investigated by the Texas Rangers, and ultimately they were not indicted. I'm not sure if they couldn't prove the knowing part, but it seemed very obvious to me that this was a structured deal to allow these communications to happen without there being a meeting. Why they do it, no idea. They're not a client. But this was a big hoopla in the paper, and the accusations were flowing on the internet for years and years after that incident. So you want to be very, very careful of these kinds of things. If you email a colleague on your board, let it end at that. Or you meet for lunch with two colleagues, end at that. Don't be making a serial group of communications that may lead to some sort of prosecution. We don't want that for you or for the city. Another aspect of this, so I mentioned you have to have an agenda, you have to have minutes. This is the third must-have. The public has a right to come and watch you and listen to you, and now, as of 2019, a right to speak during your meeting on any open session item. So if you have an executive session only item, I don't think they have a right to talk about it when they get up for citizen comment. But any other one, and they have a right to speak at it before you bring it up or when you bring it up. So maybe it's the beginning of your meeting, and they want to come speak at citizen comment about agenda item number 12. You have to let them speak on agenda item 12. You can ask them to wait until you get to it. It'll be more helpful if they wait until you get to it. But if they want to speak, drop that hand grenade, and go home and watch Survivor, they can do that. There are some cities that would put citizen comment periods at the very end of their meeting agenda. Folks are having to wait till midnight to say their piece, and they pick up the phone, call the state legislature, and we get legislation like this. So they have a right to speak. We can have reasonable rules, and we do here in Bastrop. They have to sign up in advance and fill out a card and disclose certain information about themselves. They're limited to 3 minutes or whatever those rules may be. That is all fair under the statute. We can enforce civility and decorum, and our rules of procedure, the city council every year adopts an amended, updated version of its rules of procedure, which they adopt for themselves and impose on you. And that includes a requirement that we all use decorum and not go around disparaging each other. Now, the statute says we have to let them criticize us, So you can't have a rule saying, no, sir, no, I'm not going to let you bash the city attorney. Yeah, let him bash me. That's perfectly fine. I have tough skin. I've been in this profession for a while. We must all allow public criticism under this new version of the statute. But when it comes to things like cursing and using foul language, I think we're justified in cutting it off there. And I'm ready to fight that fight if someone tries to challenge us for not letting them use curse words during our public broadcasted meetings. We have that duty to facilitate public input and to allow criticism. You can have an emergency meeting with just 1 hour's notice if there's an imminent threat to the public. Oops, I forgot is not an imminent threat to the public. Similarly, if you've already put up your agenda, but you need to add an emergency item, you can do that with 1 hour's notice. But again, it's an imminent threat to the public. I've actually had clients where a rail car goes off the rails and spills ammonia downtown. And they insisted on having a meeting to decide to move City Hall operations to the school gym. I told them, just move your operations to the school gym, but nope, they insisted on a meeting. Fine, you can have your emergency meeting, put up your agenda an hour beforehand, call up the media and let them know you're doing it. If there's a catastrophe, I've had clients that have to leave City Hall because either there's a tornado outside and they need to get to shelter, or the police chief has come and said, if y'all don't go home now, you may not get home. It is really raining outside. If that's the case, you adjourn your meeting and you can come back the next day. In fact, you can come back within 72 hours without posting a fresh agenda. Your original agenda is good for 72 hours if there's a true catastrophe. What amazes me, if you look at the list, epidemic was on there. Same with the previous slide. Oops, I keep pushing the wrong button. It's not on there. In the statute for emergency meetings and emergency items, they had epidemics in the statute. So we all kind of knew this was coming. We just weren't really prepared for how to do it when it did come. So in our open meetings, I end where I began. You'll be smart if you assume all data you come in contact with is public and you treat it accordingly. Please, please, please think before you create or hit send or hit post. In fact, think before you even hit like. Judges in courts have been thrown off of cases because one of the parties went back and found that 2 years ago the judge liked a person's position or liked a person or a party. It's creating conflicts where there were none before. Just use your brain a little bit before you do that and think about what the consequences may be. When you get together with your boards and commissions, assume that gathering is a public gathering, which means it's a meeting if you've got a quorum present. Unless you're talking Dallas Cowboys, then go for it. You're free to do so. Private devices can have public information, so safeguard them, be careful with them, be careful what you use, and be prepared when Anne Franklin writes you an email saying, we have an open records request. Do you have any data that's responsive? Yes, I do. Here you go, Anne. I'm providing it to you so you can analyze it, maybe let Alan take a look at it. And then just email, text messages, blog posts, all of those things are rather dangerous these days. I use all those things. I do. I love email. I hate email. Have a healthy respect for it and you'll be all right. And that is it. And Colin walks in just perfectly. You've got your timing down. We're entering the home stretch, folks. Any questions on open meetings before we move on to our last topic? Nope, you all got it? If you just remember this and keep that handout with you, it'll answer most of the questions you're going to have. If more questions come up, just talk to your staff liaison. They'll solve it for you, and if they can't, they'll give me a call. All right, this one is less heavy on the law and more heavy on because Alan says so. So if you don't believe this and you don't want to absorb this, I'm not going to be offended. Just been doing this a while. I've seen very healthy, successful boards and commissions, and I've seen the other kind. I make more money off the other kind, but I actually appreciate seeing those healthy boards and commissions so we can all do good work for our citizens. So here's some tips and pointers and best practices for you. Boards and commissions can be absolutely vital for any municipality. I think they're a key to democratic participation, getting citizens involved in what goes on in their government. You can serve a very crucial function, for sure. BDC, doing enticements for businesses. P&Z is the final stop on some plats. This is absolutely necessary. And in a home rule city, we must have a P&Z. When I talked last week to Wimberley, a general law city, P&Z is optional. In a home rule city, you must have a P&Z in order to exercise zoning. So we've got to go through this process. But if you don't have healthy, functioning boards and commissions, they can be a huge time suck for city staff. They can be distracting and disruptive when they're not in alignment with the city council's rules, policies, and vision. They can be a liability. I've seen, not my clients, but I've seen other Texas cities where P&Z has done things that are downright discriminatory and bring civil rights lawsuits against the city that cost the city lots of money and years of grief. They can be real political nightmares, not just because we may disagree with each other, but because the way they go about conducting their business. Speaking to a P&Z a couple months ago where they basically berated and insulted the applicants that come in front of them, that then city council has to deal with later. And so sometimes it's about law, it's about policy, it's about politics. Sometimes it's about relationships, it's about respect, it's about manners. When you think about who the players are, all the people we deal with, you think about city officials, guys like me, appointed to do, I work through a law firm, but I'm actually appointed. I took an oath standing pretty much in this spot when I was hired, so I'm a public official too. We have consultants, we have the electeds, we have the volunteers, we have the employees. Citizens, I'm always amazed to hear what people's definition of citizens are. Are you talking about your neighbors? Are you talking about voters in general? How about the folks who actually own property here but don't live here? Or they own a business but don't live here? And gosh, we're a tourist community. We spend a fortune attracting people to come to our town, leave some money, and then go home, right? Well, do we care about them? Are they citizens to us? I think so. I think they count in this process. For sure, there's all the applicants who need permits and authorizations just to do their projects. They're the vendors who want to make money by helping us meet our mission through all the contracts that we approve. Special interest groups, we're not immune from those, whether they're environmentalists. We've heard from racial or ethnic-based groups. We absolutely hear from development community and their lobbyists. Lots of them come here before you and will come before your boards and commissions. We always keep the regulators in mind, state, federal, and local regulators, environmental regulators, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. There's no shortage of oversight for Texas cities. Some will come before your boards or commissions. The media, we have a local newspaper, which is owned by an even bigger newspaper, which has both paper and online. And then there are just so many journalists that are really just your neighbor with a laptop connection. And yes, they're citizen journalists. It's the age of citizen journalists where they're self-appointed government watchdogs keeping an eye on all the shenanigans happening at City Hall. The utilities, in Texas, we have systems where utilities are often broken up among multiple providers, and that's true right here in Bastrop. Who's providing your water or sewer or electricity may depend on what part of town you live in. We involve them all in our decision-making process. What happens in Austin affects us. What happens in the county affects us. Best, I rarely see a community that is great as helping each other and sharing as Bastrop and Elgin and Smithville, Texas. And so we like to know what's going on there, because what's going on in their community is going to affect what happens here in ours and vice versa. And of course, as a lawyer, I don't want to deal with courts. I really, really don't. I have to constantly be thinking about what if this ends up in court. Municipal court, code enforcement matter, an eminent domain matter, and a county court at law, or what are we doing before the district court? Are we suing to enforce our rules or contract, or being sued by somebody who doesn't like our rules? That will affect you. Some boards, the board themselves and the board members of Bastrop get sued. If what you're doing or not doing is all in your official capacity, we defend you, the city of Bastrop defends you, and we have insurance providers who handle our defense, which means they'd be handling your defense as long as what you're doing was in your official capacity and within the boundaries of the roles of your office. Your position may dictate what you do. Your position may change over time, but I encourage you to think about your Are you the chairperson? That comes with a set of responsibilities. The vice chair, are you just a member? We have a few employees and staff members in the room. Sometimes you have to think about what's the role of the applicant? What should they be doing? What are the audience doing? What's the media doing? All these different roles come together, usually in this room or in one of our smaller conference rooms. On that board or commission you applied for, were you drafted? We don't have any press gangs here, right? So no one just threw a hood over you, threw you in the back of a buggy and brought you to a meeting. You asked to do this, and we're glad you did it. What are you doing? Are you a legislator? For sure, the city council works in that role pretty often, but sometimes you will too. Planning and zoning tends to hear about draft regulations before they get to city council and make recommendations. One reason I know you were chosen is for a representative reason. No, you weren't elected, but maybe you represent a demographic group here in Bastrop, part of the community that city council and mayor want to see represented at the big kids table. Sometimes you're in an executive feature or an administrative feature, such as when you're doing plats. There's not a lot of discretion in plat approval. Either it meets our rules or does not meet our rules. Boards and commission members are often asked to be a counselor, to be an advisor. Again, I think about when we got some controversial issues in Dripping Springs over wireless telecommunication towers, amateur radio towers, very complex federal law. The FCC preempts a lot of city regulation, but neighbors who buy ranches want to look at the sky and the stars, not the red blink, blink, blink in their backyard. So we had a big impetus to do something about that. It helped that our chair used to be in wireless telecommunications. He understood the lingo, he understood the technology, he sympathized, but knew he was on the regulator side at this point. Well, sometimes each of you has some expertise you're bringing to the table that may have been why you were picked to be a board or commission member. I've seen board and commission members be an advocate. Certainly we have city council members that, depending on the issue, will be advocating on behalf of some part of our population, advocating on behalf of an employee, trying to convince the city council to go their way. Maybe you're not an advocate on every issue, but you can imagine there's going to be some where you do that. Or you just the one who's the commentator. You don't have new initiatives. You don't actually particularly care what action is taken, but you've got something to say about everything. Well, that's perfectly okay if that's your role. If that's your only role, I'll wonder sometimes. But group dynamics, you tend to see a little bit of everything on these boards. The subject matter expert, something about your profession, your upbringing, your life, makes you the expert on that topic, and you're contributing that to your board or commission. I've always been amazed by the information gatherers who spend all their time in between meetings gathering data for the next meeting. Sometimes that's a very valuable service. Lots of volunteer hours save the city money and effort. What gets me sometimes is that they just kind of bring it to the meeting and dump it on everybody. So what I'm asking you is, if that's what you're doing, you're gathering this information, thank you, that's wonderful. Can you share it in advance? Can you give a copy to your staff liaison or the city manager's office so they can go through the data? That will make your meetings more productive when you actually show up to a meeting. Functions can be different, and they may change. Each of you has a different task. Are you brought together to provide a particular service, a deliverable? Is it an ordinance? Is it a contract? Is it a recommendation about rules, a recommendation about equipment? What is your purpose? Why are you here? It's going to vary board to commission. And if you don't know, ask and get that clarity up front. We should share that with you. Some boards and commissions are problem identifiers. Something is amiss. We don't have enough ball fields. We need more ball fields. This is the problem. I don't know how we're going to solve it, but we've got to have more ball fields. No, we don't. We need a skate park. Skate park is absolutely, not in Bastrop, we don't need one. We got one. But for a while, that was an identified need we had to come up with a solution for. So maybe you pivot and you're the problem solver. We've dumped the problem on your lap and we don't know how to fix it. In Westlake Hills, I remember they had the Wastewater Advisory Commission. It's exactly as sexy of a job as you can imagine it was. They wanted their wastewater system, LCRA had it. How do we get that system away from LCRA and expand it? It took them years to do it. Ultimately, The guy who became mayor after that was the chair of the Wastewater Advisory Commission. So I'm thinking sewer and trash is the fast track to success in municipal government in Texas. You may have problems dropped on your lap and asked by the city of Bastrop to help us come up with those solutions. Visioning, goal setting, I think all of you have a small role to play in that. For sure, groups like planning and zoning, BEDC, absolutely being challenged to look not just to tomorrow or next week or next year, but 20, 25, 50 years into the future, and help the council have that crystal ball so they can make the ultimate decisions on what we need to be prepared for that vision to be realized. You are all part of the intake. Citizens may or may not come to council, they may or may not email the mayor, but perhaps they talk to you. They see you at HEB, they see you at the coffee shop, and then you then funnel that information to City Hall. That is a legitimate purpose and a good thing that y'all are doing for us. You make recommendations regarding policy formation. Maybe you like the rules, maybe you don't like the rules. Well, it's not your power to ignore the rules, but if you think we need to change the rules, then you can speak up through your board or commission, and those things will be funneled to council, and council will get to deliberate those sorts of things. Occasionally you have a role in implementing council's vision. You didn't come up with the big vision, but you're tasked with helping us put the rubber on the road. ZBA, Zoning Board of Adjustment, is the only group I know of that really kind of sits in a quasi-judicial field. You're kind of like a panel of judges hearing someone put forth their case as to why the law should not apply to their project, or why they should be grandfathered, or why staff's decision is wrong and should be overturned. And so if you're ZBA, think about wearing your black robes every time you meet, because you're kind of like a group of judges, and you're discerning the facts and discerning the law, and you're making a ruling from the bench. And sometimes you're an appellate authority like ZBA is. If you don't like a staff decision on a zoning matter or a permit matter, where you get to appeal that. And if you don't like what ZBA has to say, you get to go to court and sue. They're the final stop, not the city council on those kinds of matters. For a moment, I'm picking on chair people. How many of you are the chairperson of your group? We got some chair people? There's no chair people in the room? Chair people other than the city manager with a master's degree in public administration? Anyone? Anyone? All right, well, maybe they'll see the video because this is being recorded. Maybe you'll be the chair next year. When it comes to successful chair people, this is what I think the key is. And if you want to see a role model for this, she's sitting over here. A good chairperson focuses on the process. If you're too caught up in the outcome, you may not be paying attention to, is everyone getting a chance to speak? Is everyone's little red light on? Did we hear from staff? Oh wait, there's a citizen. Good chair people pay attention to the process. I've seen mayors who could not focus on process. For agenda item number 8, hand the gavel over to the mayor pro tem for agenda item number 8. And the mayor pro tem then took care to make sure everything worked well with how the meeting went, not necessarily what the ultimate vote was. A good chairperson understands their group's resources and any limits. Is money an object? Is staff time an object? Do you need to have the right people at the right meeting? If so, then that's something that the chair needs to arrange. When Westlake Hills was debating, how do we have tough tree preservation ordinances while also addressing risk of wildfire? Well, the chair was responsible for making sure you got a certified arborist to come testify. You got one of those Aggies from the Texas Forestry Service to come in and testify. You got the right people there so your people could ask the right questions and make the right decisions. A good chairperson remembers that meetings are for members. Yes, the public can come and talk, I told you that, but the meetings are not for the public. The meetings are so that the board can actually conduct board business. I'm a staff member. Meetings are definitely not for me. My chance to do my thing happens before and after meetings, but occasionally I show up as a resource. A good chairperson focuses on decorum and civility, which can be a very unpopular thing to do, but they've got to be able to do it. If you just let your meeting be a free-for-all, number one, you may not get anything done. Second of all, your board members may quit. They don't want to come. Why am I spending my time this way? You're emboldening the trolls in your town to come and hijack democracy. Let's just not do that. And normally there is no parliamentarian. Normally you don't have a uniformed police officer tapping people on the shoulders. It's the chairperson that has to do that. And for sure here in Bastrop, our mayor does a good job of trying to keep a grip on that. We've had some tough meetings. Just this summer, we've had some tough meetings. A good chair tries to move along in an orderly fashion. It doesn't mean you have to take your agenda items in numerical order. You can take them out of order to let people go home early. You've got a guest. You've got a high-paid consultant sitting in the room that's getting paid by the minute. You can take things out of order, but still have an orderly meeting where you move through all the steps. I mentioned trying to have the right people to attend. Sometimes the right person is city management. Sometimes it's me. A chairperson is looking at the agenda, talking to your liaison, and thinking about these things in advance. A good chairperson fosters board member participation. Is the council member at this end quiet because they don't care, or they don't understand, or they didn't get a chance? Well, give them that opportunity. Maybe they're declining the opportunity to talk. They've got nothing to say. Give them that opportunity. You would like to try to build consensus when you have that opportunity. Let the public come in and speak during the appropriate times. Sometimes we don't want to hear it. It's painful to hear it. Yeah, this is a democracy. We need to make opportunities for them to do it. And the last one is the most important one, because this is the reason Robert's Rules of Order and Rosenberg's Rules of Procedure exist, is what happens when you have this meeting, you go through all this effort, you walk out, and the next day you're not quite clear on what you did. And so you ask your secretary or clerk to give you the minutes, you're looking at the minutes and you're still not quite clear. Make sure the motion is clear. If you need to restate the motion, ask someone to help you write the motion. Make sure the council, the board, the task force knows what they're voting on. It's quite incredible when it's a clear motion, everyone votes, and the next day there's a different understanding of what occurred. You as a chairperson should not want that to exist. It's very inefficient and very frustrating for everyone, including the applicant or the vendor or the citizen that came before you. All right, moving off of chair people, what are good traits of successful board members? Show up. You're here tonight, so I'm not worried about that. But you need to show up. And if life throws you a curve and you're not able to make meetings, let staff know and the chairperson know maybe you need to be replaced. It's not an indictment of your character or anything, but if you can't show up consistently because of work, sick relatives, travel, maybe this is not the position for you. If you can, please, on behalf of staff members everywhere, eek. All right, here we go. Second bullet, ask your questions in advance. Don't save your questions for meetings. If you know you got a question, email us, email your chairperson, because maybe answering your question takes research. And so we'd hate to show up at the meeting, you ask a question, and we don't know the answer. What are you going to table it? Come back next month? If the question just occurs to you, then it just occurs to you. But if you have these questions, let's not save them up and just ambush your staff or your chairperson once you get at the meeting. Be prepared. If you get an agenda packet, when the meeting is gavelled in, is not the time to start reading the agenda packet. Someone took some time and effort to put that together so you'd be prepared for the meeting so you can come and listen and talk and think and vote. And we do hope that you're brave and you do speak up. Some of us are shy. We're waiting for an invitation. You just need to stick your hand up or press the little button that gets your attention, the chairperson's attention, and gets you called on. Please be respectful. This is part of my emotional journey, is to become more professional of people I despise. It's really hard. They'll come to the dais, and usually if they pick on me, that's fine. I'm used to it. They'll come to the dais, not here, but in other towns I work for, and they're bashing the mayor or they're bashing the city secretary, and I'll chime in to defend their honor and really just kind of embarrass myself and everybody else. So I've just decided the rule is I will show respect to everyone, not because they deserve it, but because the public office I've been given deserves it. The citizens deserve it. If I lashed into everybody that deserves it, I'd embarrass Mayor Connie, and I'm just not going to do that. So I ask you not to do that sort of thing either. Try to be fair. Approving someone's permit, their contract, their request, it shouldn't matter that they're your friend or your neighbor, you go to the same church. Let's treat similar people the same and bring some consistency and some uniformity to Bastrop. I know the community has made great advances in that in recent years. And even though I told you to be prepared and be efficient and all that, if you're not ready to act, don't do it. Generally speaking, I would rather you postpone, delay, or table if you just don't have the right information than to make a bad decision. If there's a deadline, if you don't pass a resolution tonight, we can't apply for that grant tomorrow and get the city millions of dollars in free money. Tracy Waldron's going to tell you that. You're going to get the message, we need you to act. I'm sorry you feel rushed. This is the realities of our situation. That's very, very rare when that comes up. Otherwise, be prepared, show up, but if you're just not ready to act, let's come back the next week and do it where you feel like you can own the decision and the council is going to be comfortable with the decision that you made. Good, successful members, particularly if you're on ZBA, avoid ex parte communications. Don't go walk the property and talk to the property owner and then come in and vote. If you're on ZBA, I think that's a difficult situation because everything you do is supposed to be based on the record. And how do we include in the record what you saw or heard when you went for your nature hike? Other boards and commissions, it's not as important. I'm just cautioning you to think about when is it appropriate to talk to people outside of meetings and gather information, come back in and vote. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. Don't disclose executive session data. Texas law may not require you keep it confidential, but we in Bastrop require it, so please do honor that. Don't have discriminatory motives. People's demographic backgrounds, race, ethnicity, sex, gender, family status, none of that should matter when it comes to making decisions before the city of Bastrop. If you have a conflict of interest, you're going to know so because you see the agenda. When you show up to the meeting, it's usually a bad time to realize you've got a conflict of interest because you need to file an affidavit and you'll need to abstain from voting. So look at that agenda in advance and see, does this somehow apply to me or my family? Know the rules and law. If there's a particular ordinance in our code of ordinances that applies to what you do, print it off, put it in a binder or staple it in a folder and get out that highlighter and know it very well. It'll save you a lot of grief and frustration as time goes on. Please be good stewards of our administrative resources. We only have so much money and so much staff, and we appreciate y'all being respectful of those. Always try to put the community's interests above your own personal interests. And generally speaking, if you will please focus, unless you're directed otherwise, focus on the big picture, and then let staff come back to you with how to implement that. We have a very professional, educated staff that often has been in other cities, and they have ideas about how to make your dreams and wishes come true. You do not have to obsess about the details on every agenda item. If you leave with a positive agenda, I think you'll be happier. Happier board members make better, more successful. If you got elected or appointed just to grind that axe, okay, that's what you signed up for, I guess. I think you're going to be miserable during this experience. I hope you embrace all the matters that come before your board, not just your pet projects. I hope you're open to the possibilities. Don't just walk into your meeting thinking you already know all the answers. Maybe you'll actually learn something at a meeting. I encourage you to be supportive of others. Maybe they'll be supportive of you when you have an agenda item that means a lot to you. If you get data that's relevant to your board, share it. Share it with the entire board. Share it with staff. Don't hog it. I so often see boards and commission members, knowledge is power, information is power, and so they play games with it, and they hurt the overall board's ability to function. And although you may never be able to have complete unanimity where the entire board is supportive of that motion, try to build consensus. If we can get consensus, that tends to be good enough. And so that is it for my prepared remarks. I know that we're just a hair over time, and I want to be respectful of what y'all have for the rest of the evening. But if you have questions, I'll be happy to try to answer them. No hands shooting up. I warn you out. I covered everything or exhausted them, Mayor.